and gentlemen,
Yeah.
it is now 7:30, plus or minus a little bit, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. David, you have copies of the minutes for us.
I do.
I'm actually going to try and remember to do this in order this time.
Oh, Frank,
That's the only thing
I'm
you don't need.
disappointed.
Look, my job is to give you guys opportunities to correct me, and we'll see what we can do about
I'm
work.
sure you'll.
I'm sure that I'll
succeed.
provide it.
You'll
I'll succeed.
succeed.
I hope so, whatever, Michael.
Minutes? What else you got?
Oh, he's got lots of other things.
So this is just the minutes?
It's
Just the
just
So
minutes.
far.
You need minutes?
I think I've got minutes, because you sent them around.
Yes, I did.
Yes, we did.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Okay, would you like to hear any corrections to the minutes or move to
Deletions, right?
addenda or something, some number like that? I've forgotten what it was anyway. Do we have any suggested changes to the minutes?
A couple.
Please proceed.
Under the section called deliberations, item 1, public interest, Alan cited the Pinnacle Board of Adjustment manual, said he believes the project fails to meet section D, E, and F. I looked all over the place for something called sections D, E, and F in something called the Pinnacle Board of Adjustment manual. I couldn't find it. Do you have a better reference?
Those were.
What?
Those were the words.
What
that
she
he
wrote
used.
down.
Yeah,
Would require a
a
process?
process, that's what he was saying.
Well, that was me. But I was taking too big a shortcut. But there was a discussion later on about clarifying that. Anyway,
Okay.
I don't care whether you leave it or not. Way down at the bottom, last line, Bill offered that this project would always consist of several buildings with several families living in each building. Is that right? Did you use the word always?
Well, as far as that was, my understanding it was a multi-family project, so I think what we're trying to decide was what co-housing meant, and we decided it didn't matter how it was owned,
Yes.
but it was multi-family.
It was always gonna consist of several.
Several
buildings,
families.
or several families.
Right.
That
That was
was
my recollection.
what we were trying to clarify and what we were actually being asked to give a special exception for.
Okay, then section 2, next paragraph, next section, the spirit of the ordinance under 2. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th line. Continuing with Walter said the properties developed as proposed concentrated on 3 to 4 acres, it would represent a great increase. I thought I said housing and population density. Housing and population density, not just density. But I may have skipped those words, I don't know.
I thought I remembered something like that.
Okay. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines below that, somewhere near the middle of the page, the sentence starts, Alan observed.
I want to observe that agricultural use would have continued even with the soils.
Would have continued there,
Yeah.
and what I thought you said was could have continued.
I think could.
Could me, it might be the more appropriate term, although I may have said would, because I was referring to the fact that agricultural use is not being done there, and so I think what I meant, that reflects what I was, the
So-
point I was trying to make.
So you'd like it corrected to could. Is that-
No, I think the evidence is that it is not occurring.
Right.
So how could it continue?
It couldn't.
But
It
you
would
said
have,
it would.
it would have continued
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
if the soils were productive.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I got some of
Not
that
could.
soil too.
So do I. Yeah. It's good for hay if you want to keep the field open.
Under section 4, the first line, Frank said he did not think the board was given data, not he said valid data to show an impact. I could be wrong.
I don't remember when
Don't
that.
remember.
Because I think we were given data.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so valid. And there's a way actually to check this, it's on the other end of that thing.
Sitting on
Yes,
that corner.
that's right.
Okay,
So if it ever gets called in another context,
We-
it'll be resolved one way or
we
another.
can-
that's all that confused me.
Do I hear a motion to accept?
I move to accept the minutes as amended.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no nays, the minutes are approved.
Excuse me, sir, you're about to fly in the boat.
Okay. Can we vote? We just.
No, I was quiet.
Okay. Sorry, sir? Okay, at this point, sorry, Walter? Yes, full board. At this point, our intention is to continue with the deliberations we started at our last meeting. And to this end, as those who were at the last meeting will remember, we assigned preliminary writings to several members of the board so that we could then form the findings for this case. And these have been completed, reviewed by council, some comments by council have been added. The individuals in question have not discussed what they have written down. In other words, Rob and I wrote something in parallel, Alan and Walter wrote other things, and none of us has seen what they wrote, except right now. And so at this point, I would ask David to pass out this group of documents for our reading pleasure. And then I would like to have a move to go into deliberations. For those who are not present at the previous hearings, once we're in deliberations, the public is more than welcome to listen, but must not comment unless they raise their hands and wish to add something to our deliberations. Okay. Pretty symmetrical pie.
Don't play bouncy.
Okay.
All right.
Now, at this point, then, I would like to hear a motion to go into deliberation.
I so move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hearing no opposed, and as is our usual, is our custom, the alternate members of the board are welcome to comment, but do not have vote.
Okay.
We definitely gonna play bouncy.
Okay. Now, Rob, I have absolutely no personal stake in what does, who does what with which. I just want to get this thing
Yeah.
They're
moving.
using it just as a base, so really it's not to have.
Oh, we spent some time reading each of them.
I think we should probably do that.
Can I
Sure.
suggest, since it's a public meeting, we should also read them out loud? Have whoever authored them read them out loud so the public can hear.
Sure.
When, it seems to me, when we get to actually discussing them, that's fine. I don't know that we want to bore them with all these,
I
but
mean, frankly,
I think I lean towards reading the one that we're considering
Right.
at the time that we
So-
consider it, and then,
let me go over this then, which I will read in public.
okay.
The applicant, this is based on Bobby Hance's
All right.
statement.
Children.
Yeah. Yeah, and it says applicant requests a use variance from the zoning ordinance table 4.1 to permit a multifamily co-housing development in the rural district consisting of 6 structures in a density consistent with that which would be permissible pursuant to the conversion option found in zoning ordinance 4.46A. And in connection therewith, the applicant also requested variance from zoning ordinance section 4.46G to permit more than 6 units in 2 of the 6 structures with fewer than 6 units in the remaining structures. And just to keep everybody in the audience informed, Mr. Titus and I have drafted parallel responses to that set of variance requests. And then others have drafted responses to other sets of requests. And I'm delighted to see that we took slightly different approaches to this. Um, Yes, you put in things in yours, Rob, which are important, in that they define the entity a little bit better.
He was trying to use an attorney.
You think he was a liar? Thank heaven. I think that Rob's summary of application requests is very good. And his hearings on the application statement is very good too, and should become pretty much accepted as what they are. But I'll wait until other members have read these things.
You could ask them for a copy of what they're reading. So it's in the public record. That's why I asked. But go ahead.
Those aren't public yet.
You don't want them?
No, I don't. No, those are not to be distributed. Those are working documents, and they'll be read out loud and then made part of the record, and then they become available to the public. Alan, to comment on the work you did, since I find it in my hand, one of the things about the request for a variance on connecting the structures, sorry, I would be happy to.
I'm having trouble following this.
But
Paul.
we should say
No,
one.
you're correct, sorry.
One at a
Yeah.
time.
To track each other quite closely in certain places. Exactly, sir. Completely agree. Goals.
What law school did you go to?
Which one did you go to?
What none of the,
Oh, that
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Oh, the one that's sort of downriver from the place I went.
So is your sense to look at these and form an amalgamation, get comment, and out of that come up with a comment?
Yes. My sense is that there are blocks of both of them,
So,
which are very similar, not surprisingly. Rob has put a lot of work into getting all the little bits and pieces we went through together. I took a slightly different approach. And we'd love to hear comments
yeah,
from
let's
my
hear
colleagues.
from the other folks.
I think the end results.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of style.
It's a question of style.
Yeah, and it's one or the other, I don't think you,
I agree.
I don't think you,
I'm perfectly
well,
content,
it's,
but,
And not everything else towards the end of the plan, of the city. I just don't know,
Mike, please. I'm not there.
sorry.
Nor am I.
yes, sir.
These are both complete and lengthy versions of the decision. And I think maybe to facilitate resolving a compact package, it might be easy to treat the input from the board members in two categories. First category being where any clarifications in data or information are presented. So if any of us spotted any sections or numbers that we didn't quite understand or agree with, that would be one set of information to convey, to correct it, or discuss. The second would be to identify separately any sections of either version of the findings that the board member might have a disagreement with.
Yes.
And if we can get through those two things on this first set of requests, then, from my understanding of what we've been told by the attorney, the two people who authored that different versions of this decision could take these draft versions as corrected and voted on by the board in concept, and walk away and clear up the language to make, merge them into a single document.
But
Can we do that?
I agree wholly with your approach. How do you all feel about that? The thing that I would suggest was that we do want tonight to vote on the findings.
Yep.
When we vote on the findings, you're talking about the facts.
Actually, to approve or deny the variances. I think that's where we need to get to.
We would like to get there, yes.
Yeah.
But if we're going to merge these two, rather than working from one or the other, then we're going to very likely be adding,
We won't,
I don't think we can finish.
well, let me make a suggestion. I don't think we have to merge them in deliberation. I believe that as long as we eliminate sections that there's disagreement on by any member,
Okay.
and as long as we correct any factual data that's presented, then we have two versions of the same document. Because some of the paragraphs read,
Identical.
are very,
Very
very
similar, very
close.
similar. yeah.
So the two guys who wrote them could, or one person, I don't care, as long as somebody went through it and said, we don't need two sentences that say the same thing.
Yeah, right.
So
I
we
agree
could,
with that.
so we could vote on the motion and the facts and the conclusion in concept with maybe just working from a very wordy version of
And
the.
to,
Does that make
to
sense?
condense it,
And then,
yeah. Now,
Condense it into the version that
let me
we.
ask on a practical basis here.
wait a
I
minute.
have an alternate view.
Yes, sir.
I'm reading them both, just as a matter of format and layout, I found Rob's easier to follow.
I agree with you completely.
And I wonder, without disrespect to what you're suggesting, we don't just use this one, and then while we're going through it page by page, lift whatever
We want out of this
structure
one.
that
So we
you-
merge as a group.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think only because of the caution that was provided by council
Yeah.
about doing stuff out of deliberation.
Well, the other thing that's good about that, then, that we can hand our secretary, our recorder, a marked up copy,
A finished
Yeah.
copy.
and then we're
Right.
done.
Yeah.
And I am in complete agreement with you that I actually
I would like to do that myself.
like
yeah.
Rob's basic layout. It's a fine one, and let's take it from there and let's go with it.
Yeah, I would agree with it. And then the only thing you could get is the facts that you think that he missed, or the
Or
findings.
if there are some,
Yeah.
and there's a couple of things that are different in them, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah,
But let's pick his,
Yeah.
move with that, say this is the master,
yeah,
this is the donor,
that's fine.
and go from
That-
there.
that works
Is that
well.
okay with you, Rob?
That's fine.
No, I think that that's probably a very good way to do this. All right. Yeah, because you put all of your variance statements at the end,
Yes.
and this is all a mess. So we got page one. Any comments or questions on page one?
Page one includes the other two pieces, the front page of
Yes.
his draft.
Includes
Draft.
actually all of the requested.
Right.
And I think we ought to pick up the language you two used in terms of describing the
So
various
you're going
requests.
to add the things that we've come up with.
Yep.
I almost think we should take this and put those to one side for the time being. And then discuss what we have written, what
Okay,
Paul's
so
written, what
basically,
I've written.
we're going to then re-inject those two later.
Yes,
Fine.
right.
Okay.
That's kind of where I want to come from right now.
Okay. Okay. So the hearings part, okay.
What page are we on?
Well, I'll turn to page two at this point, Walter.
At the top of the page, it says findings of facts.
Yep.
I'm going to suggest that we say this is finding the fact regarding variance number one.
That's correct.
And then we'll have
That's
separate
correct.
finding of facts. that
Yeah.
we can get.
Yeah, I agree.
Variance number one or one and two?
It's actually one A, B, and C.
A, B,
Yeah, right. In his number and says.
Yeah, and that's this.
so, just as a picky point, I'm not sure B is actually a variance request. It's a conditional request associated with, permissible pursuant to the conversion option. You see,
Hmm.
they're not actually asking for a variance there.
That's a wrinkle, yes.
It's a wrinkle, but I just want to make sure, do we want to consider that a procedural wrinkle?
I simply broke these out based on the last document they gave us.
Yeah.
Which is essentially this piece right
Which is that,
It's restated, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually copied from that electronic version.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
But you see that 6 sections density consistent with that would be permissible. all they're asking for is a variance from 4.1. 4.46A describes the nature of what they're asking for. And it may turn out that you want to consider that a variance from 4.46A. If it makes life simpler, that's fine.
Well, if we said yes to 1A,
Yes.
allow more multifamily, would we have to address 1B?
Yes.
Or maybe
Yeah.
we would address 1B first and then 1A, I don't know which,
Well,
whether
again,
it's chicken and egg, but.
Here's the problem with 4.46, is that technically, that conversion option is the prerogative of the planning board.
But I think they have cast it as a request to avoid that procedure and have us grant the variance.
Fine,
Right.
let's take it on that
I
basis
agree.
and go with that.
That is what I believe they
That-
Are
okay.
are you saying then that we ignore 1B for the time being?
No, we're saying,
actually,
we're
okay.
saying we
Probably
accept
just
1A,
restating that
B,
it needs to be.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
all right.
that's fine, I just wanted to clarify that,
Yeah.
so that the sense of the board was clear.
Yeah,
Good,
which is why I asked.
yeah. Okay. So you cited the objectives of the rural district. And I think that these are pretty completely parallel. Yeah,
Yeah, we are.
and,
The only issue that I have with the citing the relevant sections of the Lyme master plan is that we make no mention of the pages that have recommendations in those, in the various chapters in there that might be used either to promote their point of view or to defeat their point of view, but it's the recommendations from my perspective that mean more to, that these are the things that the planning board says they should consider doing to change the ordinance.
but they haven't changed it.
They haven't changed it yet,
No,
but that's,
and that's why I didn't go.
but the wrinkle is that they are making a recommendation for a future board to do so.
But that has no force, because it's not part of the.
No, it doesn't, but my point being that if we're going to lean on other sections of the chapter, we need to, if they are saying a recommendation that kind of counters what they have said in the main body of the chapter, then we should acknowledge that.
Where specifically do we go with that thing?
Can you hear the specific things
Yes.
that Alan's referring to?
Right.
What I have done with chapter 1 was to look at the recommendations, and I don't doubt what has been extracted from the text, and I'm sure it's there. But they have made, you could make an argument that the recommendation guide and control development might be used to permit an application such as this, but I don't think so. I think that one doesn't work. It does say allow for a diversity of housing types suitable for people in a broad range of economic circumstances. I'm not sure how they are going to achieve that in an ordinance.
Is that for the rural district?
This is for the entire
It's
town
the
of
main
Lyme.
master plan.
It's the main master plan.
But it's not about the rural district specifically?
No,
It's an
no,
overview.
it's in the overview chapter, right, the first.
I think the
chapter.
section on page 19 though, which both Rob and I have cited there, and then does say ensuring a mix of families by accommodating housing for people of all incomes.
That's the wrinkle that I get into with,
Yeah.
and then,
But we're, I mean, our,
Did you have some other ones that specifically you were thinking about beyond the diversity?
I get into chapter 2, and there are things where it is recommendation. Consider recommending changes to the zoning ordinance to accommodate infill development in the villages.
But that's in the villages.
Right. Enlarge the Lyme Common Village zoning district to accommodate additional
Yeah.
growth if and when the current zoning boundaries become too restrictive. Now,
But that's not
that's
what we,
that's not something we can do, but that's something that I see as an issue that could be used against us.
but it has the thing that we have to basically rule on at the end of the day is what has the force of law, and that's the zoning.
That's the zoning ordinance, yeah.
And those is, I mean, a lot of the master plan is just guidance for the zoning ordinance.
Mhm.
And that says that's something in the future, and we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, I think we could end up muddying this,
All right,
unfortunately.
okay.
I don't think it's our responsibility to
Yeah.
revise the zoning ordinance.
Well, I'm not suggesting we do that.
Well, I
Yeah.
actually kind of sounded that way.
Yeah.
The irony is that those recommendations are the way this applicant should have gone, which is to seek some changes to the.
To the zoning
To the-
ordinance, which
to the zoning
they
ordinance.
did do,
This has
yes.
been stated on a number of
Yeah.
occasions.
Right.
If folks don't like the way this thing works,
Yeah.
they should join the planning board and modify the ordinance.
Yeah, true.
Or form a citizen committee to propose legislation that would be
Yeah.
acceptable to all parties based on sound thinking.
Yeah.
And that's just fine, but that's not what our business
Yeah.
is.
But part of the reason why I brought the issue up is that I wanted to make sure that that's clear, that we are,
David made that point at the very beginning.
yeah,
But what we're stuck with is what we got.
yeah, I would
Um,
agree. Okay.
Now, if we go, say, on your findings of fact, 1, 2, and 3 are fundamentally echoed,
Yes.
direct echoes.
Yep.
As there are 4 and 5, I think.
Well, 4, mine's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, I added some changes to 4 from where we originally discussed as a factual finding.
Okay.
Whereas I took a slightly different tack on that. Where do you have, by the way, the Pinnacle Project was proposed this change to the ordinance and that was defeated? I think you have it in there somewhere. Probably in the back.
It is. Should be in history, it's number 6.
Number 6, okay.
6.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, fine, so that's taken care of. And then I put in this long section on the spirit of the ordinance as observed. Do you feel this is necessary or not necessary?
We're working, I'm confused, we're working from Rob's
We're looking
as
for
amended.
Rob.
Where's that again?
And
Okay.
And he's comparing to his.
I've moved on to page 3 of my writing,
Okay,
where I've,
is this under planned developments, or?
this is in the spirit of the ordinance as observed.
I'm still on page 2 of Rob's.
But it hasn't
Right.
been any Rob's, that's what Rob was saying.
I guess I think what you're proposing there, to the extent you want to bring it in, should be in the finding regarding the variance criteria.
Yeah, which is where I put it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not-
the spirit of the, under the
Yeah.
spirit of the
Yeah.
ordinance.
So what we go in where in yours, that's what
It's
you're saying.
down near the end, isn't
Yes, go toward the end.
it? Okay, fine.
End of yours.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
okay, so we'll
So
leave
we're
that
not
for
there.
now.
We're not there.
So the, yeah, no, here's where, if we go to page 4 of mine, and here's point 4, plan development. And I've said, the board concludes that the proposed project is a form of plan development. The applicant has requested a variance from table 4.1, which supports the conclusion that the applicant acknowledges that the proposed project is a formal plan development. Can or should we say that?
Sure.
Which section?
I don't remember them saying.
Yeah, I don't, no testimony was.
No, that's why I
directed-
brought that up.
I don't think it was
They
directed.
they said they wanted co-housing.
Right.
Again, we concluded that.
We concluded, but
Yeah.
they
They
didn't.
didn't state it. I don't believe.
I think that the whole use of the word co-housing is a red herring.
Well, that was from the minutes why I said that regardless of what it is, it's multifamily.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Multi-building,
Agreed completely.
whether it's condo or co-housing or
Or
apartments
apartments.
or whatever.
Yeah, but it looks like a planned development from the outside.
I don't know.
I don't.
Well, I think Rob's addressed it under item 4.
Okay, well,
The
that's.
proposed project, a co-housing condominium development,
Resemblance.
resembles a planned development but lacks a commercial component.
Yeah. I
This is
agree.
noted, I would say allowed,
Okay, let's leave it with,
But
let's stick with what Rob said.
in the
then,
planned
and
development
keep-
definition of the ordinance.
Let's stick with what Rob said and keep moving. This is just fine, it does the job. And I didn't have much in ag soil, so we can pass on by that and simply say that's standard. What do you want to do?
Not so quick.
Okay.
Does it affect something that I used in my decision? I'm not sure how, but it may be inconsistent with some findings that I have. We can come back to put a star next to it.
Okay, that's a pretty straightforward statement.
Yeah, there's nothing to be ambiguous about.
There's nothing ambiguous about that, I mean, it's a statement of what the ordinance says. In the history of applications, this strikes me as being just fine.
It's my impression as well.
Yeah.
I like 7 as well.
Um,
You have something?
I'm not, with respect to David, I know he testified to this, but the ordinance is silent on whether it has to be an old building or a new building.
It's absolutely
It only
silent.
says it has to be
Right.
5 years old.
That's correct.
The last half of that paragraph.
Yeah,
Is
I mean, I can appreciate the intent of what the planning board had in mind, but that's not
Not
what they
what it
wrote in
says.
the ordinance. I would
I agree.
be
Strike it.
inclined to take it out, only because
not
we
what's-
have to be guided by the language of the ordinance, not what the planning board thought about when they.
So what,
So you're saying to take out that second sentence?
The
First sentence.
I wouldn't rush to it.
I'm just asking if that, if it's pertinent or not.
Well, here's another piece of information you can put in. There was a section in the citizen survey that provided statistics, reactions from the town, which guided the planning board in preparing the master plan. And one of the questions in there had to do with the preferred housing. And there's more than what I'm going to read. But question 6A, new residential growth in Lyme. Question 6C, Lyme should encourage the development of housing in categories. More housing development should not be encouraged. 22% agreed strongly, 20% agreed, 13 no opinion, 19%. So the town agreed that more housing development shouldn't be encouraged. And then they broke down categories: in or near existing villages, along existing neighborhoods, clustered in neighborhoods, eastern long subdivision, western part of town. Somewhat irrelevant. Lyme should encourage the development of housing in conversion of large existing buildings, highly favored by the town. Single-family homes, highly favored by the town. Single-family homes on large lots, highly favored by the town. Less favored than the first
The
two.
problem is, we're still stuck with the fact that once the building is built, it's an existing building.
Yeah.
That was.
Okay, that's the issue, it's the
It's
timing.
really, right,
Yeah.
I mean, the testimony was
Yeah.
about how old it's.
There's no age factor.
The ordinance just says 5 years.
Yeah, 5
If
years.
it's 6 years or more
Right.
older, that's lovely.
We're golden.
You'd have to reach in order to draw the conclusion
Yeah.
that by changing that to allow no timing, you're basically encouraging large housing
Yes,
development.
yeah.
Changing the intent.
Changing intent.
But
Yeah.
it's, it's,
That's
Which
clear.
is a
clear.
clear change to the ordinance.
That's a
yeah.
clear change for the ordinance, but
So
the
I-
tradition, the historical building part of it, or old farmhouse part of it,
Is
Doesn't-
irrelevant
is
to, I
irrelevant.
think, our
Yeah.
finding.
Right.
I didn't want to get our interpretation of the ordinance confused with
The
an
ordinance.
opinion by a member of the public.
yes, I agree completely.
That was all I
Yep.
wanted to just make.
No, I think that
sure.
that's entirely correct.
So are you suggesting then that we strike those first two sentences in section 7, number 7?
Yes.
Just simply
I
say
would just
section
start-
4.46.
Take out the word in the third last, take out however it starts.
Just
Yeah,
say
yes,
section
agree.
I would
4.6.
Everything else prior to that should not
Right.
okay.
Eight seems straightforward.
8? Yes, I agree.
9 seems straightforward.
Yes.
10 seems straightforward.
Yeah.
11 seems straightforward.
I think
It's an opinion.
It's a fact.
it's a
It's
fact
fact,
if
yeah.
you consider only the first sentence.
Yeah,
The other is opinions on various.
that's what I was
matters.
referring to.
Okay. Should we strike that?
I think
Strike.
that's a fact. That's
What, the second sentence?
The second sentence.
Sure is. Co-housing can be structured either with clustering of single-family residences or with multifamily dwellings.
It's a true statement.
That's true.
That's
Okay,
true.
We'll leave it. Good. 12.
Could we say co-housing is defined by the applicant? Otherwise, I have no idea what co-housing means. We have no definition in the ordinance to guide us what it means. There's nothing in the law that defines, there's no statute we can look at. I would just prefer to say co-housing is defined by the applicant.
Can be
Co-housing
structured, and
as
say that
defined
can be
by-
structured as a.
Yes, right. I can
Okay,
take it.
so you're adding that for the
I
second
just-
sentence.
I don't want us
Yeah,
to look
I-
as though we've adopted a
What the
definition which
definition
we
is.
didn't adopt.
So you're saying co-housing, comma, as defined by the applicant,
Right.
close comma,
Could be
Right, I
can be
agree.
structured.
either.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill, thank you. 12. That seems straightforward.
That's correct.
Do we need, in your view, to bring up anywhere in our findings the thing I noted at the beginning of my thing, that their application to the variance was for 6 structures, but in fact, they're asking for a lot more structures than that.
I don't feel strongly about that. I mean, I agree with you that they understated what they're doing in the total complex.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But as long as we.
but I think you got it as well as he.
Yeah.
I think it's
You've got it as a
cleaner.
fact, so.
Yeah, it's gotta find a
All right.
good-
Yeah, that's
That's
fine,
yeah,
that's fine.
that's fine. Good.
13.
That's my first question.
I got an issue with that.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I guess the number of numbers that I've seen, 50 has clarification. I've seen 87 bedrooms, I think, somewhere, but maybe I'm wrong. Is it Is it defined anywhere that we can at least reference the document that says 84?
There was a fixed number, so
Because in
Rob
the,
can find it.
I think in the traffic study, it's possible that
Last meeting, we got the phasing document, spoke with the final phasing document.
is it a
Memorandum.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, if it's in there, that's good.
They're item number 3.
What does it say on the
It's
plan?
right here in the plan, it's,
What'd you say, which revision?
this does say 87, Walter, you're right, and this is December 2014.
Which revision?
The revision is not signed, it must be the original.
So that's the original, and they made 2 or 3 revisions afterwards because the lot coverage changed, all kinds of things changed.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
So it'd be nice to fit it onto one document. You got
Okay,
one.
there are exhibit number 3, we talked about 84 bedrooms.
Is there a date?
Well, it was submitted in the February, for the February 19th.
It's
I
better-
mean, we can
it's better in
identify the tab.
December.
We can identify the tab,
Yep,
It's the original application.
yes.
Okay, that's probably good enough.
so 84.
The issue that I have with the number of bedrooms in particular is that in terms of septic system design, if you have a bedroom, it is presumed that you have 2 people per bedroom,
Mhm.
as far as the state is concerned. Now, does that
That's for
apply?
septic tank.
That's for septic tank and leach field area design.
I don't think they care how many people live there,
No, they don't.
other than septic.
Other than that, the square footage for the leach field and the volume of the septic tank, or tanks, so you may have 2, but,
You don't have more than 2.
yeah.
So you're assuming there's 168 people,
Yeah. Potential for 168,
but
yes.
there's only.
They are saying only 84.
Bedrooms, but.
Yeah.
but
That's true.
There's only 71 people identified, max.
59 and 12, 71, but it does not mention how many younger than that. But, yeah, you're right.
So there's gonna be an awful lot of small children under the age of 5.
Yeah, right.
So
to get up
71
that,
from
yeah.
168 would be, what, 90-something?
Mhm.
Children under the age of 5?
They're gonna be very,
They've identified a number for a number of people, adults,
Right.
but that's a projection of something. I mean, it's a number, I mean, it could be 62, could be 90.
I'm just curious where the other, what the extra bedrooms are for.
Well, isn't
Are we talking about a summer resort, or are we talking about permanent housing?
I haven't seen anything about a summer resort.
Yeah, I'm
This
assuming
is gonna be
permanent
a
housing.
conversion to seasonal residential instead of co-housing.
That would have to go through the zone. I think engineers.
I don't know what these numbers do for us. I'm glad to have them written down there, and
Well,
other documents have been submitted.
If
but-
they're in a finding of fact, at least if they're referenced a document that was submitted by the applicant.
it's relevant, it
Well,
becomes
we can say
relevant.
the testimony has been given that.
Yeah,
There will be.
I would agree.
We're not allowed to raise our eyebrow?
Yes.
Okay, I'm raising my eyebrow.
But not at this stage. Yes,
Keep your eyebrow down for now, then.
I don't. Someday, if, you know,
Yeah.
Should we say for occupancy, applicant has stated there will be.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
I'm gonna refer to the initial exhibit, yeah.
Yeah.
And refer to the exhibit that they've done, thank you.
Yeah. I like
That's,
that.
again, clarified, it's not us stating that number 60 adult we shoot.
Bless you.
Because I'm thinking,
I think 14's okay.
I should tell you on 14, I used the most recent pro forma they gave us on the financials, because these numbers kept changing.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you need to refer, can you refer?
I may need to refer to
Yeah.
that, yeah.
the May 19th
Yes.
submission,
Yes.
because I
As
went back
noted
to
in the
that.
May 19th pro forma submission,
I'll find it.
but that's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's where the data's going.
right. And that's true in project finances too, because that's what you're looking at,
Yes.
Yeah.
For both.
for both phasing
Yeah.
and pro forma.
That's probably true for the phasing of the workforce statement.
It's
Yeah.
your
Workforce housing.
Yeah.
Yep,
Well, that's been pretty consistent. Number 16, they've been pretty consistent.
Okay.
It says applicant submitted, so it's on the applicant.
They've been consistent.
Okay.
yeah, and then that's, 18 is the finding that we're all agreed on.
Well, I just looked up the definition of driveway, and it says does not serve more than one lot. There is only one lot, so.
Well, we don't know whether there's only one lot, because that's a planning board,
Well, as it's proposed.
as it's proposed, yeah.
I thought the driveway referred to the curb cut, which serves the adjacent.
Yes, it does,
Okay, I didn't do
Okay.
the,
yeah.
The lodge and camp, I think is the same.
It is
Curb
one.
cut. It's the same curb cut.
Yeah, that's why we
Absolutely.
say it is not a driveway.
So
Right.
because it's served.
Two lots.
More than one unit.
two lots.
Well, driveway can serve two lots, no more than two lots.
There's also serving numerous structures on
It
this.
doesn't talk about that
Yeah,
as the
that's true.
definition, it just says
That's
shall
right.
serve no more than two lots. I think the planning board should probably rewrite that to say no more than two dwelling units or whatever, if that's what they wanted.
Right.
That's what,
That's not what it says.
but that's not what it said, and that's why I went back and asked you if I could read that again.
My take on that was that I looked at that, I saw the word lot in that, and I went back to look at the definition of lot, and it says a parcel of land occupied or to be occupied by a principal building, and the accessory buildings or uses customarily incidental to.
And there's more than one principal building.
Yes, that would be my take on this, is that there are
You
five,
substitute the other.
three principal buildings, if not four or five.
So if it had multiple buildings, it would no longer qualify as a driveway.
That's the.
That's how
Would be a lot,
It doesn't really.
Yeah.
single lot,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that was the direction I went
That's
as
our
well.
logic, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is that your sense?
I'm just listening to these. No, this is something that came from our prior discussions. I did not change this from the prior discussions.
But I do think it serves many, many,
Too many units.
changes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
ideally, we're sending this all back to the planning board, saying there's some clarification needed. So-
Yeah, right.
If we're gonna say that not the number of structures, but the number of principal buildings and
Yes.
accessory, whatever that lot is.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's it say,
Right.
principal building or accessory, what's the exact?
A parcel of land occupied or to be occupied by a principal building and the accessory buildings or uses
And that is
customarily
section,
incidental to it.
that's section which will all,
That is lot, definition of lot,
that
section
lot
two.
definition.
Yeah. Two definitions,
I didn't look far enough, you're right, I'll let you try.
yeah.
I withdraw my objection.
So you're leaving the number of structures served?
We're going to say
Yes.
number of principal and accessory buildings.
Number of principal and accessory buildings.
Yeah, I would agree there.
Project would be served with a septic system that. Do we need to say anything in the septic system about, requiring, special exceptions to pass through conservation areas?
I don't think we need to say
Okay, that's fine.
Because then you
that.
ask, they haven't come for, they haven't
That-
come for a
that is a
septic
spec-
permit.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I don't think they've come for a septic permit, I mean, it's, we're stating that's a fact.
Right, that's fine.
I don't know, we need to say that, by the way, to get the permit, you're gonna need.
So we've got areas of constricted structures.
Both 19 and 20 are good, yes. The areas of constructed structures.
And that's data directly
Yeah.
from there right up.
I agree. I'm not sure what to do with 22, because of the fact that there is more acres than there is in the lot.
That's because the zone's
Because
overlap.
of the overlap, yeah.
And that's
Do
what
they,
Sean,
do they overlap and not, or should we leave it out is where I was going with
I think it's useful.
I think too, so let's leave it.
that. Okay, all right.
I have a question on 23.
Yep.
I agree in principle, it says, conservation district encroachment substantially all four of the projects were to be built on agricultural soils, 4 acres plus. Is it 4 acres plus, or plus or minus?
Plus and minus, I think.
I did a calculation and estimate based on the plans I submitted, and I came up with, depending on where you
Yeah.
draw the boundary
Oh, yeah.
of what they're doing, could be as small as 3.2 acres. But plus or minus is good enough for my purposes,
Yeah,
and I think it's accurate. One of the things I noticed is that some of the ag soils that are included in the 12.5 acres are little tiny spots isolated by wetlands, in which case you couldn't get to them, make no practical use of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the structure section where the development is,
A bigger piece.
Yeah.
it's the only contiguous piece that's.
Which is probably why they chose that area to develop.
I think so. Okay, so that satisfies that.
Yeah.
What is it? I didn't see 4.7 acres of the lot. Is that up, not in conservation district?
The additional subdivision.
Or are they up
additional
along that
information.
logging road?
I don't know. There was a package of drawings that had 4 or 5 drawings. One showed conservation district overlays on the whole.
Yeah, I don't know if I have that in.
Were those the small PDF? The other one, where it was to be able to-
I don't know.
Came last week.
Is that-
No, this came,
Those right there.
the one I'm looking at came in a binder some time ago.
Oh, okay.
And I can't quite tell where the not conservation districts are. So I don't know where the 4.7 acres comes from. Do you know, Rob?
I don't, because again, that came from our prior discussion, I'm gonna go back and look at our notes.
Is it on? Is it need?
Thought that came from Brian.
Yeah, I was wondering if it,
In the flatter areas of the steep slopes. So maybe that's where the leach field is.
okay, in Brian's email of May 18th, he said there is approximately 4.7 acres of land that's not encumbered by any type of conservation overlay district.
Okay, so
That's a statement, but I'm not sure whether I have a map ready to back it up.
So
We don't know where
It's-
that 4.7
It's testimony.
is.
Test, an engineer for the applicant has stated the following.
So
Yeah,
just add
let's do
testimony
that.
from the
Yeah.
applicant's engineer.
It seems it could be here,
Yeah,
where the proposed leach
I
field,
think it is.
or the septic system.
Yeah, for the leach field is, yeah. Because that's one of the
Because
flatter,
everything
and
else up here is steep slopes.
he's out of the steep slopes district.
Yeah.
So could we say within the steep slope district, the flatter areas within the steep slope district? It sounds like it's flatter areas that are part of the steep slope district.
Okay. Okay,
And it's actually, if it's not in the conservation district, it can't be in the steep slope district, right?
Within,
25 and 26 look reasonable to me.
With one exception from my point of view, and that's where other concerns were related to the view shed, height of buildings and the need cut. That's true, but we have not been given what the height will be of the central building or the big building, from the average grade around it. We were told that it would be 40 feet from the low end of the building, but we don't know how the slope extends along the building. But as phrased, this is correct.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I wanted to bring up at this
Okay.
point.
And they did request actual special exceptions on the height.
Right.
They did talk about it, yes, I do remember that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they've acknowledged that the buildings will be in excess.
Yeah.
Um, The regional planning commission strike me as perfectly straightforward.
I would agree.
I think 20 is straightforward, 29, what I said and what you said are fundamentally similar. The data don't allow any basic conclusion.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
30 is a mild statement of language.
Right.
The only question I have about that is if this is where we're gonna bring in with one of Walter's findings, or we'll do it separately, but we could put it in here.
You might as well, it's a finding.
Yeah,
You know,
so we
I mean, we can elaborate on it as it applies to the lot coverage.
Yeah.
There on
Okay,
Okay.
And the rest of them strike me as,
Just that.
yeah. You've indicated in 34 that in fact there are other constructive uses for the property,
yes.
Which is critical.
Where's the applicant actually pointing?
Yes. And so we get then to your findings for the variance.
Right. When you were looking at the variance, were you following the ordinance lettering?
The,
Or the RSA.
RSA.
I think they use the RSA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they're the same content, but they're different numbers.
Different number.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I'm following the same list.
Yeah, because you used the worksheet, and I lost mine, so I had to work from the book. I couldn't find where I put it.
Oh, I know where
Oh.
you were sitting next to me at the.
Oh, you did it again!
It's in my wastebasket.
Okay, so,
That makes sense. On A, Rob's funny. The only thing that I'm not sure I would put in is the issue of the prior expression of the town resident rejecting a proposed zoning amendment. I'm not quite sure that all of the reasons for the rejection it was rejected, but I'm not sure that the reasons were necessarily
Relevant to this application.
relevant to the application. Yeah,
Right.
that's my issue, that's all.
Let's have a discussion. I mean, I just took this out of the minutes.
I would agree with you, that they're in the minutes, and yes, town did reject a change to the zoning ordinance made by the applicant, recommended by the applicant.
I have no problem with anything in that depends on the rest of it.
You can delete it or you got to,
Take it out.
yeah, I don't,
The only reason for not removing that statement, or, there's sort of two issues. One is the fact that the town rejected by vote an attempt to put in a multiple unit development in this place. But there's also this master plan issue where people express their opinion about condominiums or housing in co-ops and overwhelmingly rejected development, housing development of that type, factor 2 to 1. It's a factor, I think,
That is a factor.
and to the extent that those opinions express public interest, I think they should be included.
And they're in our findings, in the findings too.
Okay.
You know, I think we can leave it.
All right.
Said another way, if the town had voted substantially in favor of a development of this size in this area at town meeting or even in a survey, we would not be making a statement that it was in the public interest necessarily, or we could not include
We could-
the sentiment of the town as an expression.
Yeah, I'll ask.
So, okay, so we
So-
have, sorry,
Sorry,
we have a finding here.
it's good.
Is are we in general agreement with this finding?
Yes.
Then at what point is it your pleasure to call for a vote on point A?
Well, then I think we should,
Bill?
yeah, go ahead.
There were some findings that are relevant to what Walter and Alan wrote, that may or may not be relevant to the specific issues that we're voting on right now.
Okay.
I can go back and isolate those, but I'm wondering, I'm okay with voting on these, all 5 of these now, if you would. I was thinking, I don't know whether time is of the essence or not, how much longer it would take to add the findings of Walter and Allen's to the 30-odd, the 35, the 34 that Ron has put in that need to be added.
Well, let me
And-
pitch in on that then.
Maybe your findings, maybe your use of the criteria would be expressed differently than what's here.
I didn't go to the criteria mistakenly, but I have findings of fact, but I don't think they would change what is in this
Having
document.
read yours in advance, it seemed like it would be, I'd have to ask Walter too, if it's okay with him to do it that way. But I think we could incorporate your findings as additional paragraphs here,
Okay,
without changing the
that would work. for me.
criteria, but I don't know if that,
I have a concern that I need to bring up at this point regarding Alan's logic here. And that is, I'd like to advance the thought for your consideration that the request for handicapped access to link the buildings is in fact speculative because there's no demonstrated
Which is what the lawyer said, yeah.
need on the part of the applicant that this need exists.
Right.
So that, in my view, it would be not subject to a waiver, but rather subject to a variance at the very minimum.
Okay. And I tend to
Particularly
agree
since
at
this is
point.
linking an accessory structure,
Yeah.
and therefore fundamentally, if these function creating one very large structure.
Yeah, but these 3 buildings that are under discussion there are principal structures in themselves, aren't they?
Right,
Yes.
except that the middle building not having any dwelling units in it is an accessory structure.
Two.
And that puts a slightly different cast on the whole matter.
Bill, I appreciate what you're saying. I think that to go through, as we're dealing with the first, and go through the findings of fact, and then go through, I think, Alex and Walls make sense, just in terms of trying to get.
Separate.
Yeah, because I think we're gonna
We're gonna run out of
stumble
time.
and die.
Well, the
Yeah.
only reason I mentioned it because some of what Rob wrote on point for findings for
absolutely.
both, particularly for the
Yep.
square footage.
Yeah.
What I propose that we do is, after these first set of finding of facts, have an additional set of findings of facts for each of their variances, and have the very first finding of facts, and we incorporate all of the ones above.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to do that.
Because that gives any overlap over here.
Yeah, I didn't want to have to take time to go back and give some away.
Yeah, I
No,
don't know.
but
Oh, yeah.
I agree.
I think from a practical standpoint, I have to say, I have a constraint, that I have somebody who's very, very ill on the scale that I need to communicate with. And I would prefer not to have the meeting extend for a huge amount more time.
Right.
Let's proceed.
Let's proceed
Okay.
and get this done
Right.
so that the applicant understands on at least this level what what is being done, and may wish to consider their options based on that.
I was trying to speed it along a bit.
No, I understand completely, Bill. My feeling is that we'd be another hour doing this, probably. And I'm afraid to say I'm not going to work too. Yeah, you gotta go to work too. Okay, so, I think we have to read this out loud.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Finding with regard to the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The board finds as follows. The proposed scale and density of the project on the proposed site is inconsistent with the purposes and objectives of the rural district and would significantly alter the essential character of this locality in the rural district. Multi-family units are not a permitted use except by a conversion of existing buildings pursuant to the procedures and criteria set forth in section 4.46 of the zoning ordinances. Since numerous other properties in the rural district share similar characteristics with this lot, other property owners could request comparable variance relief, and the cumulative effect of equivalent development would be totally inconsistent with the less obtrusive uses intended in the rural district. Prior expressions of the town's residents in rejecting a similar but even less intrusive proposed zoning amendment is indicative of the sentiment that such development is not in the public interest. The zoning ordinance as currently enacted represents the public interest in what is permitted or not, and under what circumstances or restrictions. For the following reasons, the variances identified in requests 1A, B, and C above are contrary to the public interest.
Clint, did you say Paul?
Foregoing.
He did
Yeah.
say following, he's
Well, I
foregoing.
meant foregoing, thank you.
It scared me for a
Yeah,
second.
sorry, for the foregoing reasons.
Yeah,
Sorry, my fault.
I had to.
Then what I need then is a motion.
You wrote it.
Yeah.
Motion to deny the variance.
No motion to deny the variance. Are we gonna,
I think what we need to do is make the finding with respect to that, we make a motion that the finding is that the variance requests are contrary to the public interest, that's the finding.
yeah, that's,
That's a better motion.
that's, okay, do you so move?
I did, I just did.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Do I hear any opposed? Let it be recorded as a vote by 5 to 0. Found the variance request in section A to be contrary to the public interest.
Not contrary
Will not be will be contrary,
Variances are
will be
contrary.
contrary to the public interest. B, the spirit of the observed, ordinance is observed, finding. The board finds as follows. The objectives of the rural district include the protection of the existing pattern of rural land uses, and thus less intensive uses are permitted. The project is proposed, concentrated on 3 to 4 acres, would represent significant increase in density not seen elsewhere in town. including the Lyme Commons and commercial districts where planned developments are permitted, and thus violate the objectives underlying the purpose of the rural district. As noted by the Conservation Commission and others, the project would have significant impact upon wetlands and other rural features, steep slopes, wetland and agricultural soil conservation district overlays. Thus, steep slopes, wetland and agricultural soils conservation district overlays, which the applicant labels as overly restrictive, are consistent with the general zoning practices in the state and are appropriately established to ensure that land is developed only according to its natural capacity. For the foregoing reasons, the variances identified in request 1A, B, and C above do not observe the spirit of the zoning ordinance. Do I hear a motion on this?
Move finding that the variances identified in 1A, B, and C do not observe the spirit of the zoning ordinance.
Second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Let it be recorded that by a vote of 5-0, the board finds that the spirit of the ordinance would not be observed by approving this project. Substantial justice is done. The board finds as follows: opening up the rural district to such an intensive use as the proposed project constitutes, results in an injustice to the town and its residents that outweighs any benefit that would be received by the applicant. The extraordinary scale of the project appears to have been proposed in part to enable construction of up to 4 workforce housing units. This small percentage of workforce housing units, coupled with the uncertainties to the viability of completing the phase construction and financing in the manner contemplated, undercuts a claim that approval of the variances is required in order to accomplish substantial justice. For the foregoing reasons, the variances identified in requests 1A, B, and C above are not required in order that substantial justice be done. Do I hear a motion?
I'm just gonna let somebody else do it.
I so move.
That the board finds that substantial justice would not be
That's
done
correct.
by granting the variance.
Correct.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Again, let it be recorded that the board finds that substantial justice would not be done by approving the variance. D, the values of surrounding properties are not diminished. Finding, the board concludes that there is insufficient evidence to reach a definitive conclusion on this criterion. It is probable that would be some impact upon property values where the variance is granted, i.e. some existing properties might see reduction in value, while others, particularly undeveloped land, might increase in value. So does the board make no finding on this?
The board makes no finding about that.
Do we have to make a finding? So that the variance...
To approve a variance, we have to approve all
Right.
5.
Yes, so we don't have to.
We don't have to, I don't think.
Okay, so then, do I hear a motion that the board makes no finding due to insufficient evidence? What do you think, Walter?
Finding board.
Okay. Yeah, it's good.
Okay,
Make no finding.
That's really good, Walter.
I'm lost in the world of double negative.
do I hear a second on this?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Before we vote.
Sorry, Bill.
Let's just read it one more time.
Then you have to add the word "there" in the second line. It is
There's
probable that there.
The board concludes that there is insufficient evidence to reach a definitive conclusion as to this criterion. It is probable that there would be some impact upon property values where the variance is to be granted, i.e. some existing properties might see a reduction in value, while others, particularly undeveloped land, might increase in value. And that's about all the data we have.
So the motion is that the board cannot find that there is a decrease
There is.
We're not
a
making it.
clear change.
if there is not.
Yeah.
No, I think that you
Somebody
have
better
to-
word that on.
I'm saying what Walter's saying, the board finds that there is, we have not found that there is a diminished value, And that is the question that's asked, so basically that's gotta be the vote. We haven't, there
I
may
think
be
you're
some
right,
hands.
Michael.
I think
That's
you've got to
right.
answer it. So Walter, I think, well, Walter brought up, I think you have to,
Okay, so
the
we're
statement
gonna,
needs to say that there is,
I
that
think-
question.
I think we have to answer that, and I
Right.
think we have to
Which
answer it the way you
is saying that there
suggested.
is not conclusive, or whatever word you want to use.
The board finds that the value of the surrounding properties is not represented.
Would not,
Would not be,
well, but it's,
are
we
not
got,
diminished, is the language of are not diminished.
we don't,
We don't
We
know.
don't have any findings that it would be diminished.
We have no data.
We do not find that
The value of the surrounding properties will be diminished.
We do not find that the values of the surrounding properties will
be
be diminished.
diminished. It's a
That
nice
works.
motion, Frank.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Rob second.
Second? There, do you have that?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
It doesn't-
the board
I have
does,
my own opinion.
that's okay. All in favor?
Alright.
Any opposition? Okay. E, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. The board finds as follows. The board finds that the lot is neither unique nor distinguishable from other similar properties in the rural district. Do you want to add adjacent to it along Route 10?
I think that,
What do you feel?
Where would you put?
He's saying that he put it is not distinguished from other similar properties, and then say along Route 10 in the rural district. He's adding adjacent
Because
properties.
the rural district's a pretty big place.
Yes, it is.
Many adjacent properties.
Does that seem
I
reasonable?
like that.
Walter?
Why, there's a lot of similar properties in the southern section of Route 10.
Okay.
So why do you say adjacent to? Oh, you're saying adjacent to Route 10, not adjacent to this property.
Or you said adjacent property.
He said property.
I'm just throwing it out to see if the board wants to say
I think you're
anything
right,
along those
Walter.
lines.
I like the way it's worded as it is.
Okay, we'll leave it as it is then. Good, okay, sorry. Other similar properties in the rural district, many properties along Route 10, you said it here actually, in town have the characteristics of agricultural soil mixes, wetlands and steep slopes, and low population densities. That says it all, actually. The ordinance has delineated such properties as part of the rural district to preserve and protect such features and to regulate development to minimize excessive growth and maintain features consistent with a rural setting. The magnitude of the proposed use is not reasonable, particularly in the light of the site conditions that characterize this and similar properties. The proximity of the lot to the property and hospitality business of Lyme Lodge does not alter the developable status of the lot. Since the owner may pursue other, albeit less intrusive, residential development under the current terms of the ordinance, a fair and substantial relationship does exist between the general public purpose of the ordinance and their application to this lot. For the foregoing reasons, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance does not result in an unnecessary hardship, and the variances set forth in request 1A, B, and C are not approved.
I would suggest we take the middle sentence, the magnitude of the proposed use, et cetera, take that out. That's not part of the hardship. It's reasonableness, not hardship. I mean, that sentence might go in the other section that talks about justice,
No, I think
spirit of the
you're
ordinance
headed to the same
observed, et
place I
cetera.
am, Rob.
yeah,
Garrison versus Henniker.
one of the things they have to establish is that the proposed use is a reasonable one. It's the second of the two parts of the hardship test.
But reasonableness by itself doesn't constitute hardship.
No.
That was the finding in that lawsuit, right?
That's right.
Right,
That's
but it's
Garrison versus
the
Henniker.
second element of the
But it's, remember, that's that clause structure.
yeah.
If not A, then B or C.
Let me say option.
Because I thought we were kicking it down to the property has to be unique for hardship to exist.
Unique circumstance.
I don't see any uniqueness that isn't applicable to everything north of that location, along Route 10, on the east
Which
side of
one
Route
do you
10, yeah,
Which is what they need.
no.
Does leaving the statement in dilute the finding?
That's the
Well,
question.
but it's not on point to hardship. It might be relevant to substantial justice. It might be under this section of the spirit of the ordinance, might be under the section of public interest, but I don't think it has anything to do with hardship per se.
I tend to agree with you a little.
Except where the lawsuit issue comes in, where it talks about just because a proposal is suited for the site doesn't mean that it's a hardship. So this actually is opposite language to that definition. If this was a small-scale residential subdivision that we were talking about getting a variance for some reason, this statement might be germane, but
I don't think deleting the sentence is going to change the effect of the decision.
I mean, this isn't on point to hardship, it's on point to other issues, and it's not a statement as it by itself is probably true, consistent with other findings that we have, but I think it's confusing in the context of why one would or would not grant a special exception based on hardship.
No, it has to apply, it has to apply.
The problem is that the statute has a broader definition
Yes.
than we do in our zoning ordinance.
Do we?
And I was
Yeah,
trying to
statute,
cover
okay.
all the bases of the statute.
Oh, wait, you
Yeah,
got one right
and I
there.
think you're right.
Listen. Do you know which one it
Here,
is?
he's got it right there.
Oh,
The
you've got,
statute?
you got the statute right there?
It's in the zoning, the variance and workflow.
Yeah, but this is, let's just look here, it's 674:33.
Yeah. 6, 7,
Because it works, it's either these two or that one.
I'm trying to cover both.
I know you are, but you don't, do we need to?
And I don't think we do, given what I've heard from past
33?
Yeah.
Yep.
sessions of this.
It's the same, the text is the same.
The text is the same
the
as
same.
our worksheet.
All right, so then,
If, it's a question what the majority board must do.
yeah.
Or take it out, let's take it out.
If you could explain or just clarify,
Why don't we just read that?
you know,
Okay.
I mean, it just struck me as being out of place, that's all.
Okay.
Nothing more.
The unnecessary hardship test. The first part in A is relating to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area. Denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship because you would have to then find there was not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of the provision to the property. B, the proposed use is a reasonable use. Those are the two standards that you have to find in order to find A applicable. If to find section A applicable. If you don't find A applicable, then you have an alternative, which is B. And the criterion in subparagraph A having not been established, an unnecessary hardship will be deemed to exist if and only if, owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, the property cannot reasonably be used in strict conformance with the ordinance. And the variance is therefore necessary.
And this strikes me as being,
These are two alternatives.
right, and this is the one that strikes me as being the more comfortable of the two.
That's why I'm trying to do both,
Item
but
two.
okay.
Yeah, I am too.
The proposed use is reasonable.
No, it is,
I'm using the language out of this thing.
I would set that out as a separate paragraph, I guess, just because it's, if you're trying to address the worksheet, then I would structure the language in the finding in such a way that it's clear which part of the
Yeah.
paragraph is to A and which part is to B.
And
We
I
have to
think we
find
need-
that B, that this is an appropriate use in order to go forward, and you're saying clearly it's not an appropriate use, then I think we should lay our, the structure of the approval or denial in that fashion. Just for clarity, because
I
to
think
me,
we have to
it's an
do it.
awkward insertion at that point.
Okay, so we know what we want to do there.
I think that mess it up.
Let's approve it, taking it out.
Let's approve taking it out. Okay, before we take a final vote on this, which we can, how procedurally do you want to go about this, Rob? You fundamentally now, between the notes that Adair has taken and what you have there, can represent what we have voted, I believe.
Let's just take it out.
Okay, fine.
Let's just take it out.
Okay.
All right, so do I hear a motion to,
I want to make one other minor change. It's the lot line lodge,
Yes,
not an inn.
but that's isn't that the sentence we're removing?
No,
No,
it's
no,
the
it's
next
the
sentence.
it's the one before.
Inn has a
Okay.
different definition in our ordinance.
yes, not on live, yes.
Right, I would agree with that.
Okay. So do I hear a motion to find that little enforcement, the board finds that there is no unnecessary hardship?
Little enforcement does not result in
There is no
unnecessary
unnecessary
hardship.
hardship.
The variance is therefore
Yeah.
approved.
I so move.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Case passed. So therefore then, I think then we should vote, then, having found, so I would move that, having found and voted on all 5 sections of the variance criteria, the board then finds the variance request is for sections A, B, and C of the first variance group requested is denied.
That's correct. I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that knocks off the first variance, and I think at this point, what is your pleasure, gentlemen, for dealing with the rest of these matters? I mean, I think you have to have a continuation.
I think so, absolutely.
Well, we could continue in the next regular meeting, but you're not gonna be here, right?
No, but I'm not critical to it.
What's the date of the next meeting?
It's Thursday a week,
8 days from there.
8 days from
I
now.
won't be here. Proceed.
So,
If you're denying a 1A, 1D, and 1C, I mean,
They're
what's-
subsidiary.
why is it relevant to work on 2 and 3?
Only because we've said we would.
It was an application for all.
They are subsidiary, no question, to the principal, but
That's
we probably ought
okay.
to vote on it.
we're simply trying to dot the i's and cross the t's.
Well, it might be a decision by court that we messed up on
On this
1A,
one.
B, and C, and that's reversed, and then 2 and 3 become relevant.
Yes, I agree with you, Bill. Yeah.
That's about the only reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, the applicant could, between now and the next meeting, ask to withdraw those.
So,
Save us the time.
when would you like to schedule a next meeting? I will not be back until the 21st.
Can we go out of deliberations and chat with the zoning administrator?
Okay, fine.
You gotta move it.
I'll move that.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we're out of deliberation.
What's the calendar for the 18th?
There's one application, but it's fairly complicated.
There's a continuation too, isn't there?
The
Little?
little
The
application.
little
Yes,
case?
the little piece also, yes, sounds
The
perfect,
two.
too.
And a new one.
And one
A
new,
little, yes, we'll have one new one, and the new one is complicated, there's several special exceptions and 2 variance requests.
Okay.
This shouldn't take more than half an hour. Alan's and mine shouldn't.
I think I would rewrite mine, but yeah.
John, I guess I move to continue this hearing till our next meeting on June 18th at 7:30.
Are you gonna be here?
Yes.
is there a second that motion? All in favor? So the hearing is continued to then. Rob, are you willing to undertake the task of creating the final draft of this motion?
Yeah.
We'll get
Yeah.
around
Well,
to
we'll get to vote.
So this,
Let's just talk about this for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would think we ought to do is have separate findings, your finding of facts isolated. And then whatever reasons that we, whether or not they can be combined under the other standard or not, you need to analyze that and tell us.
I'm not sure what you just said.
Okay.
I think what, let me tell you what I think I heard,
Okay?
because I'm gonna have to do it.
Okay.
Is I'm gonna take my working copy
Yep.
and skinny down the findings that I listed that are parallel to or identical to some of the findings that have already been presented. And reduce those findings to issues that are specific to the variance number 2 request. So I'll come back with another motion or draft motion
Yes.
to be reviewed.
But I think you need to make statements on each of the 5 criteria.
I'll,
Of the,
Right.
yeah, I'll take this on.
yeah. And I
I'm
think
gonna have to
do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay,
At this point, is it appropriate to provide them with an electronic copy of what you had to save them the secretarial time? Is that not permitted under the?
You mean without the changes tonight?
No, the changes,
Whatever is available, just so that it's safe. for
Yeah,
the
I
time.
mean, I don't know why he can't give.
Provide to,
To you.
oh, I've got mine.
Oh.
Mine are good.
Okay, all
I
right.
may need a copy, but.
Okay.
And somebody's gonna, I mean, we've got a week to do this, right?
Yeah.
So somebody's going to
Still like, yeah.
have.
so the Rob, once
Somebody get this done right.
when the finding has been typed up by you, and you would then sign it,
Yep.
so that we can give it to the applicants, and then they can decide what their next strategy is.
All right.
Right.
the
And,
DRS,
Yeah,
there's
Send me the.
Yes.
The draft, and I've got.
the
and you got
changes,
him? Good, okay.
and then you just have
I
to
just-
sign it. Then you
Okay.
have to
Yeah.
sign it.
Okay.
The applicant obviously has the right to request reconsideration.
yes,
And if
Yes.
they wish to appeal, they have to do that.
yes, unless they go for workforce. They won't do that. This said, I suggest we adjourn.
Wait,
I guess I'd like to say one other thing. And this is really directed to the applicant. And this is simply personal views. I happen to think co-housing is a good idea. And I think Cobb Hill and the one in Peterborough show what can be done. I think you should have tried again, and I still urge you to think about trying to work with the planning commission and figure out a way to do it. I mean, this is trying, to do a variance is just trying to squeeze too many things into what the variances are intended to do. And so I urge you to think it over.
I'd like to add, that from a design standpoint, I agree with what you said, and it's, I think, probably a very good design. But just, the law is what the law is. So, motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
All right.
So we're adjourned.